Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On Wednesday, February 4th, welcome on into the program, friends. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
So today on the show, the focus is election integrity, voting safeguards, fears, and politics. President Donald Trump recently urged Republicans to, in his words, nationalize voting. And he's described states as agents of the federal government in elections. He specifically called out Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And all of this comes as the Trump administration is pushing states to get access to voter registration data. They're backing proof of citizenship proposals like the SAVE Act and floating changes that could reshape how mail voting, voter rolls, and election equipment are handled. So what's actually possible under the Constitution? What's just rhetoric? What's just politics? And what could genuinely interfere with the midterm? So we have a panel. Today, we have lawyers who represent constituencies on opposite sides of the aisle. We also have a city commissioner who works on the ground that can talk about logistics and what happens on election day and some of the protections that are in place. And we also want to hear from you, our listeners on the road, in the car, elsewhere. Are you worried about election integrity? And what do you think local officials should do as President Trump pushes to nationalize elections? You can give us a call and participate in the conversation. The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, share the video, but feel free to leave your comments in the chat.
When we do all sorts of topics on this show, people often circle back to the midterms and their lack of faith in the integrity of the midterms. We get comments about this all the time, basically regardless of what topic we're doing within the political sphere. So today, we're going to address those questions head on. 888-477-9499. Again, the email, studio2@whyy.org. But first, a trio of local news stories. Let's start with one just on the edge of our region, but could impact us directly. U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement has purchased a warehouse in Berks County, Pennsylvania for over $80 million. And in response to media inquiries, ICE suggested that this is part of its plan to open more detention facilities. This warehouse is about 90 minutes northwest of Philadelphia, 35 minutes outside Reading, which, by the way, has a large immigrant population. It's in Upper Bern Township. The township, by the way, said had no advance notice of this deal at all. The area is represented in the state Senate and House by Republicans. They issued a joint statement that was kind of interesting, saying they were concerned about the loss of tax revenue because it could go from a warehouse to a federally owned detention facility. They're also concerned about security in the area. So they had some questions and they're trying to get answers from the federal government. Spotlight PA says this facility, if it becomes a detention center, could house up to 1,500 beds. For context, for comparison, right now the largest detention center in Pennsylvania, and indeed the entire Northeast, is Moshannon Valley in western Pennsylvania. It has about 1,900 beds, so this is almost as big, potentially, as the largest ICE detention facility in the state of Pennsylvania.
So, a lot of folks who, lived in Philadelphia probably a few years back may be having deja vu, because I remember there was an 8-year-long grassroots effort to shut down the Berks Detention Center where immigrant families and children and later immigrant women were held by ICE. So this was it was shut down in January of 2023. And I remember covering rallies in Philadelphia and all around the region saying shut down Berks. And they filed lawsuits. There was, actions happening all over our region. And this coalition shut down in February of 2023. There was lawyers, organizers, faith leaders, and allies. And so I can only imagine that this group is probably like, do we need to come back and do more work now that there's this word that there could be another facility in Berks County.
I'll also be watching the local response. This is located in an area that's overwhelmingly Republican. That doesn't mean people necessarily
want that there.
I mean, NIMBYism crosses lines, right? So I'm just curious to see what the response is going to be, and was interested that the initial response from the local politicians, the Republican politicians, was a little lukewarm. Yeah. So we'll watch that as well. Story number 2.
So it has been 10 days plus since the storm dumped a storm dumped 9 inches of snow on this city. I don't know if you guys remember that. Yeah, it's still around. And people have been complaining about the snow that has piled up all over the city. So today, the Parker administration announced a same-day work and pay initiative to help get this snow cleaned up. Mayor Sherrell Parker and the Clean and Green team, they held a press conference earlier this morning. Here's the mayor explaining the rationale behind this next big wave of workers. Take a listen.
Even when the street has been plowed, if you are in a wheelchair, you need the curb cuts for the ADA ramps to be fully free of ice. And that is why it was necessary to launch this One Philly snow removal effort across the city of Philadelphia.
Because if you roll down the main streets, it looks like the work has been done. But if you're walking like I was today, it's hard to cross the street. The sidewalks are not clear. So Parker's team said these workers hired for this initiative will focus on ADA ramps and areas near recreation centers, schools, and commercial corridor. Carlton Williams, who's the leader of the Cleaner and Greener initiative, he said that he has heard the frustration of the residents. The city deployed hundreds of vehicles, but they had to deal with these freezing temperatures, parked cars with nowhere to move them, narrow streets. And so, while the main streets are clear, lots of vehicles couldn't get down to some of the smaller streets. But he wants to know for folks on those smaller streets, he's like, we're coming. We're going to get to you because, Avi, people have been big mad.
Yeah. I saw something interesting today from the National Weather Service in Mount Holly. So the main reason the snow has not melted is because, it's been cold, right?
Yep.
It's not warm enough. But apparently also the fact that there was ice on top of the snow created more water content in the snow, and it sort of apparently blocks the melting process, the evaporation process as well. So it's been like a double whammy. And so that's why I find it a little difficult to judge the city, because we've not seen circumstances like this before. No. I salute them for continuing to try to chip away at this thing, no pun intended. But, at the end of the day, what people care about is the condition of the streets and the sidewalks, and they're still not great.
They're not. But look, they're releasing videos. They want people to know they're on it.
Yep.
So we hear you.
Speaking of on it, what should be on a Philadelphia Monopoly Board? Transition. So 30 years after the initial release of the Philadelphia edition of Monopoly, there's going to be a new Philly Monopoly coming out. And you could decide what's on the new Philly Monopoly board. So Philly Voice had a nice write-up of all this. The first Philly version of Monopoly came out 30 years ago in 1996. You can't buy it anymore, no longer in circulation. And some of the spaces on the board are a little out of date. The Core State Center, Ristorante de Lulo, Strawbridges, RIP. So anyway, a company called Top Trumps owns the licensing rights to make these local Monopoly boards, and they're making a whole bunch of them in a lot of different cities, and they're turning their attention to Philadelphia. Yay. And you can go on their website, and you could submit what you think should be on the Philly Monopoly board.
So, of course, I know, if you know Avi, he has some ideas about what should be on the board.
Why would I not have ideas?
You got, go ahead, lay them on me. What you got?
So here are things that were not on the original Philly Monopoly board that I think should be considered.
Okay, go ahead.
Reading Terminal Market.
I agree. That's good. Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. The Italian Market was on there, but not Reading Terminal.
Yeah, that's good.
How about FDR Park?
You love FDR Park.
I love FDR Park. Maybe that's just a me thing.
Yeah, but it is. I don't know.
It's a city gathering place.
I'm like, I'm mid on that one.
The Magic Gardens on South Street.
That is pretty iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that would teach people something about Philly too.
Yeah. This would teach them something too. The Boner Forever building on North Broad Street.
Boner Forever?
You don't know this?
I've never heard of this building.
We're learning something today, folks.
Boner Forever.
Google
Please tell me about this.
Google it.
I'm nervous about that name.
I did, by the way, submit. I went on the website and I submitted WHYY.
We should be on the board.
We should be on the board.
Yeah, and I know you gave them a good pitch.
So CBS 3 was on the original board, but no other media outlets. I thought that was a little funky.
Maybe they had a friendship over there.
So I wrote this company a little note on the submission form, I said,
give me your pitch.
WHYY is Philadelphia's longtime public radio and television station. We've brought the region legendary local programs like Fresh Air and national favorites such as Sesame Street. And we continue to innovate today. For instance, the radio show Studio 2 is fast becoming a fixture in the Delaware Valley.
Thank you.
Celebrate a tradition of learning and excellence. Put WHYY on the Philly Monopoly board.
I vote for that.
Everyone, go to the website now. Flood them with WHYY nominations. Maybe we'll make it.
That would be remarkable if we got on the board.
It would make me play Monopoly again for the first time in like 30 years. How about that?
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Do you play Monopoly at all?
I do.
You do?
I just got the Wicked Monopoly.
Wicked Monopoly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there you go. Haven't played it yet, but I do.
You're learning about architecture in Philadelphia. I'm learning about Wicked Monopoly. It's a great exchange of information here on Studio 2. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Yep. Welcome back to Studio 2 here on WHYY. I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent. Recent comments by President Trump are raising alarms about election integrity ahead of the midterms. On a podcast Monday, President Trump urged Republicans to, quote, take over voting and, quote, nationalize elections. And yesterday, in the Oval Office, he doubled down on that idea, repeating false claims about 2020 election fraud.
If a state can't run an election, I think the people behind me should do something about it. Because, if you think about it, a state is an agent for the federal government in elections. I don't know why the federal government doesn't do them anyway. Take a look at Detroit. Take a look at Pennsylvania. Take a look at Philadelphia. You go take a look at Atlanta. Look at some of the places that horrible corruption on elections. And the federal government should not allow that. The federal government should get involved.
And this was just days after an FBI raid in Georgia to seize voting records related to the 2020 presidential election. And there are other concerning moves by the Trump administration related to voting, including the Justice Department's pressure on states to turn over their voting rolls. And on top of all that, Trump has said he wants to end mail-in voting, and in a recent interview with the New York Times, expressed regret that he did not send in the National Guard to take voting machines in the swing states that he lost in 2020.
So today, are fears over election security warranted? What does the Constitution say about who has the authority to make the rules? And can our election system withstand potential threats? Joining us to dig into all of this are Adam Bonin, a Philadelphia-based lawyer specializing in election law. Adam, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
We also have Seth Bluestein, Republican City Commissioner for Philadelphia. Seth, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And by Zoom, we have Michael Morley, a law professor and director of the Election Law Center at Florida State University. Professor Morley, appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
And for our listeners on the road, at home, and elsewhere, we want to invite you to participate in the conversation. Our questions are you worried about election integrity? And what do you think local officials should do as President Trump pushes to nationalize elections? The number to call is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, put your comments in the chat.
I'll start with this comment from Eric, who says, what happened to the people that yelled about states' rights and less government control? So on that note, let's turn to Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution. I'll just read it in full here, Adam. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. Choosing spelled in a very odd way, by the way. So it's an old document. Adam, what does that mean? Who sets the rules for elections?
It means that the states set the rules for the election. It means that, in Pennsylvania, our General Assembly sets the rules. It means that these rules are guided and governed by the Pennsylvania Constitution as interpreted both by the legislators and by the courts. That is who runs the elections. The federal government has a limited role in these elections. Obviously, there are things like the Voting Rights Act to protect the rights of all voters to participate in these elections, but elections are and have always been largely a state concern.
It does say, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. So what does that mean?
I mean, that's referring to things such as the Voting Rights Act. That's certainly also referring to things such as federal protections which exist to protect the rights of military and civilian overseas voters at elections. But it's also important to note, it says Congress shall make these laws. It doesn't say the president shall tweak these laws. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remember that that's how laws are supposed to happen, by, starting with Congress and then signed into law by a president.
Yeah. And so, Michael, want to bring you into the conversation because, the president has written executive orders related to, elections and what people, and so I want to sort of talk about what power does the president have over voting, over elections, over anything related to election integrity?
Sure. So the scope of the federal government's power with regard to elections varies depending on what type of election you're talking about, right? So the Constitution actually distinguishes with regard to congressional elections, which is what the Elections Clause governs that you had just read. So U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate. Congress has virtually plenary authority to step in to govern virtually any aspect of the electoral process, right? Historically, of course, it has chosen as a policy matter consistent with federalism principles to leave this primarily to states. But the Constitution, the power that the Constitution gives to Congress with regard to congressional elections is coextensive with state legislatures' powers. And if it wanted to, Congress could step in and completely replace state election codes with regard to congressional elections. The president can't unilaterally do that. The Congress certainly has not given the president any authority to unilaterally do that. And of course, right, few, if any, people want to have two separate sets of election laws, one for congressional elections, one for presidential, or one for every other sort of election. With regard to presidential elections, the constitutional language is very different. With regard to presidential elections, the Constitution says state legislatures determine the manner of choosing presidential electors, and Congress gets to set the time of choosing presidential electors. So right then and there, Congress's power textually is more limited with regard to presidential elections. Despite that, the Supreme Court has said it generally assumes that Congress has the same sweeping power over presidential elections as it does with congressional elections. But again, that's Congress, not the president himself. With regard to all other elections, state elections, county elections, local elections, Congress doesn't have that right. Sweeping authority. Congress's only role is pursuant to the enforcement clauses of provisions like the 14th Amendment, equal protection, due process, the 15th Amendment, which prohibits racial discrimination in voting, other voting rights amendments. The only power Congress has is to pass laws to prevent violations of people's constitutional rights with regard to state and local elections, or if it wants to use its spending power to offer money to states if they agree to do certain things with regard to state and local elections.
So with all of that groundwork laid, I guess one of the things that you hear from folks that are concerned is that somehow the federal government could invoke some sort of emergency and use that as a pretense to interfere with elections. I don't see anything in the clauses that we've talked about, Adam, that talk about emergencies or a war or a natural disaster or anything. But are there interpretations in case law? Is there any precedent for there being an emergency or even a pretend emergency, right?
Yeah,
and there being some sort of interference based off of that?
I mean, look, there have been rare examples that I can think of where elections have been delayed because of actual emergencies. There was a primary in New York City on September 11th, 2001 for mayor, which was postponed, but it was held. There, if you go back in the case law in Pennsylvania, I mean, there are cases I can think of where there was like a flood on election day in a city that prevented people from voting on election day.
But to be clear, in those cases, the localities decided to suspend or postpone the election.
No, it was never the federal government. It was, local judges or local officials who made that determination. Obviously, in the case of a catastrophe like September 11th, there wasn't any time to pass legislation. They just knew that they had to do it because no one was going anywhere.
Yeah, and so I just want to get your reaction then when you heard this, Adam, that this call for nationalizing elections. What was your initial reaction when we know that the Constitution has certain requirements and that Congress has certain roles and that what the president can do is very limited? If that's the baseline, your reaction to this call to nationalize elections?
I mean, look, obviously it's frightening. Anything that comes from the president, which emanates from, if I lost the election, it was stolen, and so therefore I need to prevent my victories from being stolen again. I mean, as to this, look, obviously we have to be wary. But one of the things that we have seen across the past 5 years with these elections is that federal judges, no matter which president nominated them, have stood up to Trump and his claims around elections and election power. We've seen it in this city with his claims with regards to the 2020 elections. The opinion from the Third Circuit, which stopped and struck down his fraud claims, was authored by Judge Bibas, who was one of his own nominees to the Third Circuit. Like, the federal courts, by and large, have really been a bulwark against his efforts in this arena.
Yeah. And I wonder, Michael, if you have a reaction. I know you represent constituencies in a very conservative state. And so your thoughts, just the reaction to the idea of nationalizing what has been a very local function of government.
Certainly, historically, elections have been regulated primarily by states. Every state, has its own very detailed election code governing virtually every aspect of the process. In recent years, both political parties have debated whether particular aspects of the electoral process should be regulated on a uniform basis, by the federal government. If you look in the early Biden administration, HR 1 was introduced, which would have had uniform national standards, liberalizing voter ID requirements and things like that. That adopted one policy perspective on what a fair and efficient voting process looked like. If you look to things like the SAVE Act, which is more focused on election integrity, building additional safeguards into the process, that embodies a very different view of what the electoral process, what a well-balanced, what a fair electoral process looks like. Both of these come from very different partisan angles. Both of them contemplate different policy prescriptions. Both of them would involve a greater level of national standards than currently exists. But I certainly don't think that there's any constituency on any end of the political spectrum to suggest that states should be ejected from the area of elections and that there should be a single new national uniform, federal agency taking over.
Yeah, because he said something like the Republicans should just take over the elections. So, did that raise any concerns?
Again, looking at the legislative proposals that have been making their way through Congress, I don't see anything like that that's been gaining any steam, that's been making its way through the system. Most of the proposals that there have been committee hearings on, that there's been support on, even just looking to Republican support on, nothing has contemplated, nationalization or a takeover. It's really been more laying down different national level rules for particular issues, such as voter registration, such as voter identification, issues that currently, right, are resolved at the state level in different ways in different states, right, against the current federal backdrop.
Let me bring in a caller now. This is Elizabeth from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, on line 2. Hey, Elizabeth, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
It's mostly a comment. I've been a local election official in Pennsylvania for 13 years. I've been a judge of elections for my ward. I've been a majority inspector. And I know that there are a lot of people that don't understand the process as it happens on the day. But I can assure you the training that we receive and the checks and balances are in place. There's no opportunity for things to be changed or monkeyed with. And the reason I think that it needs to stay at the state and the local level is because the community engagement of having people who live in the ward work the election poll. I know my neighbors. I know who's coming in. We trust each other. Nobody thinks that there's anything untoward going on. We take great pride in what we do. And at the end of the night, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but we're required by election law to post a fully tallied ballot that shows all of the results for every candidate and every question on the door outside the polling place. We tape it up and it stays there. Yeah. It's very Paul Revere, and I'm very proud of the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's a great call.
Very transparent.
Susie has a
Elizabeth,
very similar comment. I have worked elections for years, and the process in place is extremely careful.
Yeah.
We are trained and work hard to be sure all citizens are cleared to vote. It's insulting that the president keeps talking about corruption in the states. Let's bring in Seth Bluestein, Republican City Commissioner for Philadelphia. You are intimately familiar with how this process works on the ground level. So let me get a sense here. I go vote. My vote is cast at my local polling place. Take us through what happens to my vote on the way to it being tabulated with all of the county's votes and then all of the state's votes.
Sure. And let's start even before the voter cast our vote. Prior to every election, we conduct something called logic and accuracy testing. That means that we test and check every piece of equipment to make sure that it is tallying the results accurately. So when we send the voting machines out to the polling places, we've already checked to make sure that they're working correctly. When you cast your vote, you have in Philadelphia at least, you're using a touch screen, and then it prints on a piece of paper the selections that you made. So you can independently verify that piece of paper matches your selections on the screen.
Because it kind of goes through the round. You can see everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an instant receipt.
Yep. Instant receipt. Then it gets stored in the machine so that we have a paper record and an electronic record of every single vote that's cast. All of those materials get back to us on election night. The electronic poll books, the paper ballots, the electronic results, everything come back to our warehouse, which is fully secured. And we're already there working because we've been working on processing the mail ballots that entire time.
Right.
And we combine all those votes together and we tally them up and we put them as unofficial results. Because I know people expect to know the results on election night of who won and who lost.
Right.
And often the margin is wide enough that networks can call the election.
Right.
But there's still weeks of work that we do after election night to continue tallying the votes. And then we conduct 2 audits after every election.
So this is my question, right? So if someone further up that chain, let's say at the state level, let's not even get into federal, tries to say, Seth didn't get 10 votes in that election. Seth only got 8 votes in that election. What you could then do, you could backtrack, look at, I guess, the paper record and see if it matches and if someone had messed with it at the state level, it would show a discrepancy.
So we are the custodians of all of this equipment and all of the ballots. So nobody is going to be coming into our warehouse and messing with any of the equipment or the ballots. We are in charge of securing those materials, and we will continue to do so just as we have done in the past.
Yeah. But to put people's minds at ease, I guess, a little bit. So, because you'll hear like all sorts of theories. Elon Musk, George Soros, whoever you want to throw out there. They came in and they hacked into the the state counting machine or the federal counting machine or whatever it is, and they messed with the numbers.
So there is no state counting machine or federal counting machine. Everything is tabulated in our warehouse at the county level, and none of it is connected to the internet. So I'll give you an example. As the electronic results are coming in onto a secured air-gapped system, we then burn those results onto a CD. We then walk that CD to a separate computer in a totally different room that is connected to the internet and upload the results. And then we throw that CD away. Nothing that touches the internet is ever touching any of the equipment. So there is no outside hacking or anybody coming in and messing with the results. And because we've done the logic and accuracy testing up front and the audits on the back end, we can be ensured that at all times those results are being calculated accurately.
So I think about what happened in Georgia and them seizing like hundreds and hundreds of boxes of ballots from Fulton County. You know, in Pennsylvania, do you keep these paper ballots? What's the purpose of keeping the paper ballots, and what is kept electronically, so that if someone wanted to question it years after the fact, what records do you have on hand and to prove that whatever happened was solid?
Yeah, so federal law requires us to keep the ballots for 22 months. So after 2 years, those ballots are no longer held. And then poll book materials are required to be held for 5 years. So we've already passed, if you're talking about the 2020 election, we've already surpassed that 5-year mark. So we don't have those materials anymore. But at the time, this issue was already litigated. We conducted multiple audits. There was ample opportunity for court challenges and appeals and reviews. And every single case showed that the votes were counted accurately.
And so I want you to sort of like respond to people who say, you have the president, you have a lot of folks who question the results of the 2020 election. People may question the results of this election coming up. Your response to the integrity, to the work, the security of the ballots and the systems that we have here in Philadelphia, because our city was specifically named.
Yeah, so Philadelphia is really blessed to have an experienced bipartisan Board of Elections. Elections in Philadelphia have been free and fair and safe and secure, and they will continue to be that way. Our caller from earlier, Elizabeth, has served as a judge of elections. So my response to people who have concerns is serve. Step in, take the training, volunteer to be a poll worker, volunteer to be an observer for one of the political parties or candidates. Come in and see how things are operating. Because when you see it and you get more involved, you'll be more confident.
And on that note, let me bring in a caller, Tabitha from Reading, Pennsylvania, who I think is on a similar vein here, similar message. Hey, Tabitha, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Yes, my comment is piggybacking off of what he just said with people that I come across at work daily, and if they have complaints about, the integrity of elections. Oftentimes I hear people say, if you didn't vote, you don't have a right to complain about anything. And I said, well, if you haven't volunteered at a poll place or done work at election poll places, then you really don't know what's happening. And that's something that I encourage my patients to do if they have a fear of the integrity of our local elections specifically. And going off of what Elizabeth said earlier was that these are our friends and neighbors with a variety of backgrounds and political affiliations that are volunteering for this. So it's not just one single group of people that are all trying to manipulate the system at this local level, and that we need to trust our friends and neighbors. And if you don't, then volunteer and go participate in these processes to gain confidence in their integrity.
And by the way, thank you for your service, Tabitha. Elizabeth as well. You had a point to jump in there, Adam, right?
Yeah. And the other thing that I would say is that when there are questions about the accuracy or integrity of election results, we have processes under Pennsylvania law to do them. There are recounts. There are election contests. They have to be filed on time, and they actually have to have some basis to them. And the Trump campaign in 2020 had the full ability to test the integrity of the election and its processes back then. They tried some things. They were shut down by the court because there was no basis to them. But we have a way to do this, and those of us who have done recounts, those of us who have gone on a division by division, vote by vote basis to determine whether an election was counted fairly, we understand just how secure and just how accurate these elections are.
Let me ask you then something, Adam, because there are a lot of people in the comments, and I think they're coming from the perspective of, this is their perspective, that the Trump administration, maybe Trump himself, is a truly malign actor here. That if he could, tip the scale somehow in vote counting, in election administration, he would do it. And then if you believe that, then the second question you necessarily have to ask is, how easy would that be to do? Like, how much penetration into the election system would you need to pull that off? As someone who knows the inside of this, what's your answer?
You would need a ton. You can't just do it by fiat, and whether it's, his boogeyman theories as to what happened in 2020 or what Democrats fear that he could do now, like, there are so many protections around the system, and they are bipartisan, not just Commissioner Bluestein here, but like Republican and Democratic commissioners in every county in the Commonwealth. All they want is a fair and accurate count. No one is trying to game the system here. Like this, it is a really well-protected system run by people with integrity.
It seems to me, too, that you would have to enter the system at so many various points in order to mess with it. Now, this doesn't get into the transition of power. That's a different conversation. We're just talking about counting the votes here. You would need lots of different, we're coming up on a break here, but just real quick, you would need lots of different inroads into the system, it would seem.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is not easy to do. This is not a hacking thing.
Okay. So we are coming up on a break here. We're speaking with Adam Bonin, a Philadelphia-based lawyer specializing in election law. Also, Michael Morley, law professor and director of the Election Law Center at Florida State University, and Seth Bluestein, Republican City Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia.
Yes. Are you worried about election integrity? And what do you think local officials should do as President Trump pushes to nationalize elections? We'll take the calls and hear more right after this break. We'll be right back. This is Studio 2.
And welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Today we're talking about President Trump's recent comments suggesting our elections should be nationalized and controlled by the federal government. Let me reintroduce our guests. We have Adam Bonin, Philadelphia-based lawyer specializing in election law. We have Michael Morley, a law professor and director of the Election Law Center at Florida State University. And we have Seth Bluestein, a Republican City Commissioner for the city of Philadelphia.
And we'd love to hear from you listening. Are you worried about election integrity in the midterms? What do you think local officials should do as President Trump pushes to nationalize elections? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat.
And so I want to sort of talk a little bit about what the president is saying versus what he's doing, because, the president is calling for this nationalizing of elections, but he's also doing some things, like he's demanding voter registration rolls from states, and states have been pushing back, including Pennsylvania. And so, I wonder, Adam, if you can talk a little bit about that and what's in these voter rolls, and why do you think, or the voter registration data, and why do you think states are pushing back so hard? Because there's many states that are fighting the administration on this.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is being litigated right now, and the pushback is, from the Department of State, from the county boards of elections, that this voter registration data contains information about each voter, which is private and is already protected by state law. Things like people's social security numbers, things like, phone numbers, driver's license numbers, all sorts of, intimate and personal information about each voter that could easily be abused. And the state is fighting to protect, to enforce state law and to protect individual privacy as to that data. There's a lot of data which is public and which the Trump administration is free to pour through in terms of voters, their names, their addresses, what party they're registered to vote. Anyone can download that stuff. But what they're going after is really private information which can be abused. And, one of the things that we've seen, it came out in the past week or two, is that one of the DOJ staffers, apparently leaked some information that they had, which was, private Social Security information to one of these outside, conservative, quote unquote, voter integrity groups to try to ferret out voter fraud. That's exactly what our Commonwealth and other states are trying to prevent here.
Yeah. And I wonder, Michael, what legitimate argument would the DOJ make that say, hey, we really have a need for this type of data?
So the Civil Rights Act of 1960 gives the federal government, gives the Department of Justice the ability to request an inspection and a copy of election-related records. And the statute's written fairly broadly. Any application, any registration, documents dealing with any act requisite to voting in an election. Now, obviously, the original intent, the original purposes underlying the Civil Rights Act, it was focused primarily on fighting racial discrimination, right? It was one of the statutes that ultimately led up to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But the statutory language sweeps much broader than that, and that's going to be one of the main issues in most of these cases where the federal government's going to claim, right, we have this statutory authority to demand this information, and states will push back and try to say, well, no, it's only for purposes relating to that particular statute, or it's only for anti-discrimination purposes, but you can't necessarily interpret that language at face value.
Let me read this comment from Rob. Rob mentioned yesterday's show. Yesterday, by the way, we're talking about gun rights. Rob says, yesterday's topic and today's reminds me of the old saying, there are 4 boxes of liberty: the soap box, the jury box, the ballot box, and the cartridge box. We've seen Trump attacking freedom of speech and violating due process. Now he's attacking voting and the Second Amendment. That's all 4. Let me bring in a caller. This is Diana from Haverford, Pennsylvania. Hey, Diana, how you doing? You're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Well, my comment is that I have great faith in our election process. I work the polls. I understand the integrity and honesty of the commissioners and the voting officials on both sides of the political spectrum. My concern is the psyops, the psychological operatives that are trying to discourage and create fear in our electoral process. I think that when things like this are brought up about the integrity of our voting, and you have obvious, maligned information from the Trump administration about how they need the records to have things be free and fair, that creates distrust. Mm-hmm. And I think that may be part of the problem.
Yeah. Thank you. Diana from Haverford.
Professor Michael Morley, I'm curious for your thoughts on that. I mean, look, you work in this arena. You're not analyzing this from a purely political dimension, but a lot of people are concerned that this conversation is really ginned up just to make people distrust elections systems. Do you think, A, that's a plausible explanation, and B, do you think it has that effect?
I mean, it's especially coming to this from the perspective of Florida, right? I've had the opportunity to work with supervisors of elections throughout the entire state, right? They're all independently elected, so people from both political parties. It's been my universal experience, both here as well as with Secretary of State from other jurisdictions I've dealt with. Every election official who I've had the opportunity to engage with has been professional, has been fiercely devoted to having a free and fair election, to doing the job right, no matter how the ultimate outcome shakes out. But part of Florida's approach to this has been having laws in place. On the one hand, having laws in place that provide protections, right? They provide protections with regard to requesting an absentee ballot, right? So absentee ballots won't just automatically be mailed to people who are in the voter registration database. They have to submit a request, right? And then even on the absentee ballot request, you have to provide some private identifying number, whether it's your driver's license number, the last 4 digits of your social security number, some information to make sure that just random people can't go looking for inactive voters, can't go looking for people. And this is all a matter of public record, of course, based on public records. Can't just identify people who haven't voted in the past 6 years and request absentee ballots in their names, right? At every step of the process, Florida has adopted reforms, and it's taken since the disaster of Bush v. Gore, right?
Yeah.
When the nation was basically making
hanging
fun
chads.
of
Yeah.
I remember the hanging chads.
We've moved from hanging chads to what many states call now the gold standard of election administration. So it's not just a matter of trust us; it's a matter of we have the rules in place that we can point to, that we can show, and that supervisors love bragging about in their public education efforts, so that the public is able to have confidence in the results.
Let me ask you then, Adam Bowden, because look, this is a state of divided government, Pennsylvania. It's hard to make changes happen, but there could be potentially a meeting in the middle where, like, for instance, one thing Florida does, from my understanding, is they're able to report results very quickly because of, I guess, pre-canvassing and other things they're allowed to do you can't do here in Pennsylvania. So there could be, I would imagine, some room for compromise where you, I don't know, require more information up top for voters in exchange for some reforms on how votes are counted, something that both parties could agree to. Let's just talk through the pros and cons of all that, Adam.
Sure. Well, first let's talk about what already exists. And I know this well because I just requested my mail-in ballots for 2026 2 days ago. I had to provide my PennDOT ID number or the last 4 digits of my Social Security. I had to request it new this year, even though I'm on the quote-unquote permanent list for mail-in voters. So I had to do it myself, and I had to provide that exact sort of identifying information. The thing that we don't have in Pennsylvania, either for mail-in voting or for in-person voting, is a requirement of the presentation of some form of, photo or other ID in conjunction with that as well. But I think what we have right now is perfectly secure.
But a lot of people
safe.
will say, and we do have some commenters being like, why not just go that extra mile? And there was a lot of concern. For instance, Georgia had put in some laws that were viewed as voter suppression. Then there was an election, and it didn't seem to suppress turnout all that much, if at all. And there was some academic research about that. Like, maybe the fears about these extra measures suppressing the vote are a little overblown, and I guess why not put that layer in? Your thoughts?
I mean, look, I think that these are things that are negotiated regularly in the General Assembly. They got closer to a deal in the last years of Governor Wolf's administration that would have involved some form of in-person voter ID. These are always things that can be discussed, and in the meantime, nothing much has changed since the landmark reforms in Act 77 in 2019, which had no excuse mail-in voting in the first place.
By the way, let's bring in another caller. We have Dave from Philadelphia on the line. Dave, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hey, Terry. This is Dave Davies, and I've been a reporter for many years.
Hi, Dave.
I had to jump in because we've had these callers who worked elections and know how it works and vouch for its integrity. And I've seen them up close, both as a reporter and working the polls. And among those who know exactly how this stuff works are all of the senators and Congress people who came up through these elections and have been through many local elections. They know they're run fair and square by people at local precincts. And it is shameful that they are standing by and supporting or tacitly letting this poisonous idea that an election can be stolen without any real evidence that take hold. And I just want to make that point. Folks who've been in this system know how it works. And that's it.
Thank you.
Dave Davies,
the one and only.
Didn't expect that. Okay. Let me ask this question from Nancy. Look, and by the way, I think Dave's point is well taken. I think everyone was nodding in agreement that the people who sometimes try to amplify these claims of stolen elections know indeed that they're not stolen.
And this Nancy question, I had that as well because and Nancy says if the federal government decides to send protection to our local polling places for intimidation purposes, what can a local poll do? And this sort of like gave me thoughts, and Seth, you can jump in and answer that, and then I have a piggyback on that. So just could you address Nancy's thoughts, like what could local polls do?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania already has laws in place that keeps law enforcement at least 100 feet away from polling places. And that's whether that's local police, state police, federal. We already have those protections in place to try and prevent intimidation of voters on election day.
Yeah. And people are thinking, could the president send in the National Guard? Could he send ICE officials, into neighborhoods? Because now they have arrest powers, right, of U.S. citizens. So just sort of thinking through, and you're saying that they have to stay at least 100 feet back.
They would need to stay at least 100 feet back.
I want to talk for a second about some of the legislation that's been proposed. And one of the acts that the president keeps referring to is the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or the SAVE Act. Adam, could you talk a little bit about this? And I'll say this, that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has called it Jim Crow 2.0, and it said that it would disenfranchise millions of Americans. Can you talk about this act? And Republicans support it. Many of them do. It passed the House a couple of times. Can you talk about this act? What would it do?
I mean, it would do a great number of things to make it harder to register to vote. And, in terms of the ID requirements that be required to register to vote, those of us who live in Pennsylvania know it's fairly easy to register to vote, but it requires the same kind of personal identifying information like your social security number or a PennDOT ID number, which is only known to you and is not publicly out there. This would add, things like, a passport or a real ID or something else to, allegedly to verify citizenship. But what it would do is it would disenfranchise voters. I know one of the things that's been talked about in this legislation is that you have, people who have changed their names, changed their surnames since they last got a passport, for example, especially women. And this would disenfranchise them. This would make it a lot harder. It's something that I don't expect to go anywhere in the Senate, but the president wants it, and so therefore a lot of Republicans are saying that they're for it. And
I quickly wanted to ask you a follow-up, because one of the fears that Republicans had, Seth, is that citizens could vote. But can you talk quickly, when people register to be a voter in Philadelphia and in the state of Pennsylvania, there's ways of making sure that you're a citizen.
Well, this is a topic I know very intimately. When I was a deputy commissioner for then City Commissioner Al Schmidt, who's now the Secretary of the Commonwealth, we actually conducted an investigation into whether and how much non-citizens were voting in Pennsylvania elections. And we worked with the Department of State at the time to identify a flaw in the motor voter setup in how people were registering to vote via PennDOT. And yes, at the time, there were non-citizens registering mistakenly to vote via PennDOT. And we were able to close that loophole, and since then, it's been extremely limited. And what we're talking about are very small numbers of potentially registered non-citizens, and even of that small number, very few of them are actually voting.
And when you say small number, are we talking about 10?
We don't know the exact number. We're talking potentially dozens at the most. We're not talking about tens of thousands of people.
Not enough to tip an election. Look, we're getting toward the end of this hour, but Michael Morley, look, I think this all comes down to a big question, which is, do you, as someone who really studies this stuff, have faith that the 2026 midterm election is going to be free and fair the way prior elections have been? I know we're just sitting here today at the beginning of 2026, but do you have faith right now today?
I'm confident that the 2026 election will be free and fair. I do think there are respects in which the electoral process can be further improved, right? Every election system is trying to balance different concerns. On the one hand, you want to make sure that all eligible voters are able to safely vote without facing unreasonable burdens. You want to make sure that the system minimizes opportunities for mistakes, irregularities, accidents, and maybe fraud. And finally, you want to make sure that it has the appearance of security, the appearance of confidence. You want to make sure that the public can be confident in the integrity of the process. And so I think there were various respects where, yes, right, if you look at the NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act of 1990, of 1993, it doesn't really talk about non-citizen voting at all. Right? The composition of the American public today has many more non-citizens from back then. So having additional protections.
We do have to wrap it up. I'm so sorry, Michael. We have to wrap it up. But thank you so much for all your contributions today. Michael Morley, law professor and director of the Election Law Center at Florida State. We also heard from Seth Bluestein, Republican City Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia, and Adam Bonin, Philadelphia-based lawyer specializing in election law. I wish we had more time, fellas. I really do. But thank you so much for your contributions today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, and thanks to our callers, especially our election workers who called in, weigh in. We really appreciate you, and shout out to Dave Davies as well. Our show is produced produced by Debbie Builder, Andreas Copes, and Hazel May Bryan. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Al Banks and Tina Calicay engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory from Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman, Aaron. Also, by the way, I'm going to thank Sheila, Crane, Steve, and Joseph for calling in. Appreciate you guys so much. Tomorrow on Studio 2.
Yes.
As the Olympics kick off, Super Bowl's coming up as well. Our TVs will be filled with feats of tremendous athleticism. Maybe it's the kick in the butt you've been looking for to keep up with your winter exercise routine.
Yeah, I definitely need a kick. So we'll bring in a couple of experts.
I'm doing great.
To talk about how the layperson can make exercise enjoyable and sustainable as we unpack how fitness trends have evolved over the decades. That's tomorrow on Studio 2. But coming up next, we have Here and Now. We'll see you tomorrow.
30 minutes on the bike.